Nerd on the Podcast is proud to be powered by Focusrite, Embody, creators of Immerse Gaming, Odyssey, Amazon, and TCG Player. Enjoy the show.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to Nerd on the Podcast you didn't need but deserve, where all levels of nerd are welcome. It's me, Tom, and no one else. I mean, that's not fair. You obviously click the thumbnail or the title, and I'm having a conversation with Eddie from the Filmlosophers. We did a collaboration with them a while, like the internet age and time is like a day is like last year, right? It's insane how long time geometrically progresses and exponentially is bigger if you have an online presence, and the lack of being online is, right? Needless to talk about the mental health implications of that, but that's not what we're talking about today. Today we're talking about something pretty interesting. I recorded this a couple weeks ago, and it was during the time and era where the WGA and SAG-AFTRA were still on strike with the AMPTP. At the time I'm recording this intro, things are a little different now. But we really wanted to talk about the movie-going experience, and to give you guys a little bit of a background on Eddie. We talk a little bit about his experience and a little bit about mine, but really we kind of just look at it from two perspectives, two walks of life, but we still love films and the movie-going experience just the same. And I think it's so funny because I've known Eddie for such a long time at this point, and we've always been threatening to do more collaborations with each other and have each other on each other's shows. That for the longest time I've always shook my fist in the air about critics, and I've always known that as long as I continue growing my career in storytelling and creating things, for I don't want to say the terminology, but I have to, linear television, or for the studio systems and movie making and stuff like that, I'd have to create a relationship with critics at some point, and I create a relationship with the audience at some point. And in my mind, I'm very never thought I'd have such at odds telling a story or creating an experience and have to realize that there is an audience involved in there outside of my own, right? I really like to tell stories that I care about. And those stories do resonate with people. They are going to be made for consumption and entertainment, and even critics. I say that with a little bit of a laugh or chuckle, because I've always had such a disdained feeling of how critics can really affect the outward impact towards people. People don't really even know, people didn't know about the movie Parasite until the critics' score on Rotten Tomatoes made it the highest rated film of all time during that era. I always will say that people, cattle to the slaughter, sheep's being herded around, they will track a number and choose not to think, where a lot of people say oh, people don't always do that. And it's I don't know. I always have a very pessimistic point of view when it comes to some sense of an aggregator and all that stuff, versus following a journalist or following one specific person versus following a herd of people. All right, I don't need to continue to keep all right, with that, I don't need to keep stalling. I'm going to just go into the show. I hope you enjoy this conversation we have. If you want to see more, please let us know. Reach out to us, comment, show those algorithm gods all the things that we need so that we can continue doing this thing, and check out all our good stuff, that how you can support us. And here's the show. Eddie, thank you for swinging by the Nerd on the Podcast feed with me. We've done some collabs, right? We've done some stuff
we've done a few collaborations.
Yeah, but it's just been so long.
And obviously Yeah, and you and I have been friends for a little while, so it just having both of us being part of that podcast community, the conversations that we have off air, it's about time we have them on air at one point in time. Especially when it comes to two people who love movies just as much as we do.
Yeah, and just to remind the audience out there, Eddie is part of the Filmlosophers, and someone I definitely deeply trust your opinion and your takes on the film industry. And it's cool because you have such a sometimes a very different way you've walked to the same conclusions that I have about certain things. But also in recent years, didn't realize because I got into Magic and then you've been playing Magic for some bit. So, the threads get deeper between us. So,
Absolutely, and it's true. Like a lot of the conversations that you and I have. I mean, to be quite frank, I feel the same way about you when it comes to certain thought processes. And even when I listen in on some of your live streams, the way you come about to the same conclusion that I come to, it's like, oh, I didn't even think of it that way, but it makes sense. And as somebody who is like 100 feet deep into cinema and movie history and Hollywood and industry, and it's refreshing to be able to have someone close at hand to be able to say, hey, what do you think about this, how do you feel about these things, kind of thing. And so yeah, I'm just excited to be here, man. I appreciate the opportunity.
oh no, I'm happy to have you here. It's been too long, and then also,
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of doing a show that one entertaining, two informational, three nourishing. Like I think there's a lot of noise on the internet, and there's a lot of people who don't want to have dialogues. They want to have takes. They want to have headlines. They want to have jokes. But you guys have definitely created a show, a community around taking that extra step to like understand, revere, and honor,
Yeah.
as well as like just take a look back and observe, seeing like how our American culture, if anything, the cinema culture around the world kind of affects our own viewing experiences, but gives people a chance to like, oh, I guess I never had a way to articulate the things I was thinking about or feeling. And I definitely couldn't do what you guys do, because if I love films and movies and TV shows, but if I did an entire show about it, I'd go crazy. But no, I'm very glad we can do it. And for everyone listening, if you guys haven't figured out already, if you don't know the thumbnail already, or you haven't seen the title, we're gonna be talking about our experiences, our viewing experiences, our movie experiences, our TV experiences. Because right now it's an interesting time. We have a lot of the streaming wars going on, the IP wars going on. Like, where are movies now? Where are TV shows now? There's a lot of buzzwords like this is the golden age of TV, and this is the time of the art house or the A20. So we're gonna try to break it down from our own perspective, and hopefully you guys enjoy along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so much going on now, not just with the strikes, but even within cinema itself. As the nature of cinema is changing, and that's the nature of change altogether. You look at cinema and you look at Hollywood, you look at the industry itself, you look at just movies from the very first film, which was like a couple seconds long, to like now we're getting massive, blockbuster films in theaters, and things that Christopher Nolan seems to be the one who keeps doing it. We get these opportunities to really see how things are changing, and not just the way we s- go to the theaters to see them, but also in the nature of like the films themselves, and even in the viewing experience, as we're going to be talking about, from watching it in theaters to, like we said, streaming it in home, watching it on on those lenses, those what do you call it, those goggles that people wear nowadays, and having like actual theater rooms where they go to in there. I mean, the nature of movies is constantly changing, and the industry itself. So I'm excited to get into this conversation.
Yeah. So we won't, keep dawdling and dirtling. We'll go into it. I want to ask you, Eddie, what has been, we have a lot of them, right? I think going to the movies, smelling the popcorn, the sticky floors. Maybe there's a kid that shouldn't be there. There's other kids that are just like, this kid makes it look bad for us. And then the families are embarrassed. But, we're going with their friends. Maybe we're going with their loved ones. Maybe we're going because we just got to go by ourselves. What has been, give me two of your favorite movie going experiences.
I can give you one of my most memorable. When I was so out here in Northern California, because this is where we're based. The film philosophers are based in Northern California.
Shout out.
Um, yeah, yeah. I went to a press screening for We're the Millers, which was a movie not too long ago with Jason Sudeikis, who's now getting worldwide fame
Ted
and
Lasso.
whatnot acclaim for Ted Lasso. Jason Sudeikis, you got Will Poulter, you had Jennifer Aniston. The movie, if you've seen it, is not a family movie. It's very much about a guy who's trying to pretend to have a family and drive this RV all the way to Mexico or somewhere like that that's filled with drugs so that he can drop off the drugs. And he needs it to look as, inconspicuous as possible. And Jennifer Aniston happens to play a stripper. And
Shout
so
out.
there's a exactly there's a lot of things that go on in that film. So you think, okay, cool. If you've seen the trailer, you know this is definitely not a kids movie. Well, I don't know what the thought process was at the time, but they gave the promotion because if you're unaware of how press screenings are done, it's usually through promotion through radio. Radio is the one who really puts out the information. They're over here calling all the promoters and so forth to get the information out to the or to the people, so that way they can get press screening tickets, or actually just pre-screen tickets for the regular individuals. As press, we get special passes and so forth. So at the time, I believe it was a local Mexican radio station. It was a Spanish radio station. I don't think they understood the concept that this was a R-rated film.
Oh man.
And so I get to the theater and I go, there's a huge line of people. And sometimes they do two screenings at once, two pre-screens. So at the time I was like, oh, there's quite a few kids here. Maybe there's a kids
But
movie
you
that I'm
knew.
not aware of.
You knew.
I knew.
Okay.
Oh yeah. And so I'm walking in, I go into the theater, I get in my seat, I'm situated, I'm talking to other press members of the press. And all of a sudden I start seeing them starting to let the rest of the people in, and I start seeing these families come in with kids. And I'm like, maybe they're lost. And then more families. And there's just this stream of families that are coming through. And I'm turning and I'm looking at one of the other press members. I'm like, I don't think they know this isn't a family movie.
They don't know.
So I was mortified. I was like, someone needs to tell somebody. So I go to the PR rep from the local marketing company who does all these, and I'm like, hey man, there are kids here. And he goes, what? And I'm like, yeah, you better go check it out. So he ends up going to the front of the theater, has to tell everybody, hey, there may have been some mix up. Obviously, you're here, but if you brought your children, just so you know, this is not a children's movie. This is not for kids at all. So where we were sitting, the sections break into two. Like there's the bottom section, and then there's the back section. And right at the end of the first section, there's like this wall. Every single parent sent their child with either a device, a phone, a Game Boy, a
Wow.
tablet, whatever, to sit right behind the wall and play with their games right in front of the press section. So, needless to say, I was slightly distracted as I was watching the movie, and I saw all these bright lights down on the bottom. And there were things that happened in the movie that obviously you didn't have to see them, but if you heard them, you knew what was going on. And it's like, these kids are gonna have questions when they get home. But I mean, it's like the nature of like the loss in communication kind of thing. I don't know what happened. I don't know how it happened, but it did make for one of those memorable, like, oh my God, there was this one time where, and
That's
yeah,
so fun. That's so fun. I feel like that is like the most anti movie going experience, but you know what? That's going to be seared in your brain for the rest of your
exactly.
life.
I'm kind of the mindset, like, so my team knows that I'm the individual who has a proclivity to shush people, or because I for me it's like I'm here at this point in my day where I'm supposed to either I'm paying for the movie, or I'm getting ready to write do a write up for the film. And so in some capacity I need to focus, and there are certain instances where in my mind it justifies I need to let somebody know after a certain amount of time to, like, hey, come on, shush. But earlier on in my time when I was working with Spencer, my co-host, and our intern Amy, which you all know,
Yeah.
uh, I was at it was at a movie for it was the remake of Overboard,
Mm.
and we had to see it because we were going to be reviewing it, and we kind of made a last ditch effort to find seats. So we found seats, um, but someone decided to bring their baby to the film, and every time that happens, I think of that what was it, the Aqua Teen Hunger Force intro, when you have that, I think it was Death Clock. If it wasn't Death Clock, it was some other rock band who does the whole opening for "Let's All Go to the
Yeah.
Movies," whatever, and they change up. And I always think about, did you bring your baby? Babies don't belong here. Take the seat outside. And I'm like, that's my mindset. So we're in the movies and it's fine for a little bit, and then all of a sudden the baby starts crying, and I am so engrossed, not because it's a good movie, but I'm focused on the film, and I'm watching it, and I'm like, all right, I got to get this, understand? Okay, blah blah blah, and then I hear a crying noise, and I immediately turn without thinking, and I go shh, and ever since then I've been known as the guy who shushes babies. So
Mm.
I just it's one of those things where it's like I'm working on it, but it's like it's part of that experience. I am so in love with film and so in love with cinema that I tend to engross myself whenever I'm, even if I'm at home, if I'm like watching something, I tend to like try to put my phone on silent, or I try not to be distracted, just because if it's new, I need to experience this for the first time as if it was the very first time I've ever seen something, and it's just in my mind, it's always about the respect to the people who are making the film, no matter how independent or how low budget or how, everybody is due their respect if they put in the work to get this far.
Yeah.
And no matter what it may be, my thought is always, I will always give them their due diligence to see as much as I'm capable of seeing. If it's something that I'm not comfortable with, or if it's whatever, I will do my best, but I will always give that respect to say I will make a strong effort.
Yeah, it's funny that when you were talking about the baby, I kind of thought immediately of I think there's a Tom Segura bit where he's like, there's a baby crying in a theater, and it's like, oh my god, are you killing that baby? And there's like, no. It's like, could you? So it's like you're doing okay, you're doing all right in terms of the
Yeah,
scale of how you can react.
there's
You're doing
no
good.
physical violence yet,
Yeah.
so I'm hoping not to get to that point.
No, yeah,
So,
and I super respect, I super align with that reverence, that respect of a film. It's funny. I think for me, so like I'm the same way. Where like I want to phones off. I'm not looking at IMDb like who's that guy from, or like thinking about like where that line came from, if they're quoting something like Family Guy has a lot of references, and I'm like, I don't know what that reference is, and then I had to look up the reference. I'm like, no, I'm gonna watch it, and if it goes over my head, it goes over my head. Like that's gonna be my experience. But I'm not in that same sense. Like if anything, like I kind of look forward to seeing the chaos in the theater, only because I feel like that's the whole movie going experience, right? So you can say my experience was hindered because of this, or it's like I'm not going to blame this movie for being something garnered where kids are going to run around. Like I don't think Sonic the Hedgehog movies are less enjoyable because kids are going excited and being happy for it. You have grown 40-year-old men screaming at the top of their lungs watching a superhero movie. So it's like it's tit for tat, and at the end of the day, like what theater chain you end up going to, but also like look around, like this is what the movie theaters have become, right? And it's not like to look down, how there's a lot of beef between stage performance and then screen performance of like high art versus low art. Some people may actually still dress up to go to the opera or the ballet. You don't have to for the movies, right? Like that's the quote unquote equalizer, where shout out to I guess Denzel and Antoine Fuqua for the first one, but
Yes,
no,
sir.
and that's actually, I didn't realize that was actually a TV show, but no, yeah, the equalizer, like it costs you $10 to $15, $20 just for a ticket. Just for a ticket. If you want to have the food and all the other experiences, that's more. But just to watch the new thing that's out right now, it won't cost you more than $30, right? Unless you're watching it on IMAX and like how Nolan intended. But yeah, I super agree with that. It's so like it's so funny that one of the most memorable things is like is seared in your brain in that way. I think if I can like Tiger Pounce on that, like I remember watching and it's not like it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I remember watching Call Me by Your Name. And
Yeah.
it was just like one of those times during was it Movie Pass, during the
Yeah.
era of Movie Pass, where I for sure I promise everyone, I'm like, I helped make that company die, because I was watching a movie every day. I didn't care
Yeah.
I saw some indie movies that I would never come across if I didn't go to like the theater next to me. I'm like, I'm gonna go watch this movie. But I remember watching
Yeah.
Call Me by Your Name. If you haven't watched it, it's about a boy who falls in love with Army Hammer, which you could already tell is a sad story. But
Based on a novel, by the way.
based on a
The
novel.
book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And most, I think, remembered for the trailer that has Sufjan Stevens as the trailer music. But anyways, at the end of it, it's a really powerful sequence, very much like I call it like almost like The Graduate or like Midnight Cowboy, where like the credits are rolling but the performance is still going on.
Yeah.
And I remember being crushed, emotionally crushed after watching that movie, and then leaving. And there were these two women in front of me, sweatpants, ready to watch, whatever, things that those two were going to do in the movie. And then I remember I was like sad, and I was just like in a place thinking about the love of my lives and da 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 da. And then these two women walk out and they say, "Oh my God, that was so hot." And I was just like, what the fuck?
Thanks for listening. If you like what you hear, support the show by joining the Nerd On Nation powered by Patreon. Go to nerdon.tv/Patreon and get Nerd On exclusives for as little as $1 a month.
And so, like, for me, that was so memorable because I'm just like, how did we watch two different movies?
Yeah, and that's the beauty of interpretation. I mean, I'm all for anybody coming up to me and saying, "Hey, did you watch this film?" I'm like, "Yeah, I really did appreciate the satire, and I understood, what it was trying to do in terms of saying this." And they're like, "Well, I just like the acting. The main actor is super cool and he's hot, and I like, or the main actress is super hot and she's cool, whatever." And I'm like, "You do you, buddy. It's all cool." Like,
Yeah.
because it's that, I think when it comes to the community of critics, I think that's what gets a lot of us caught up in the weeds, is thinking our interpretation is a higher tier than other people's interpretation, and we get lost in like, well, I get that you're like this, but you really should see it like I do. And that kind of is part of that divide. I've been in this community for almost 15, 16 years, and one of the things that I've noticed, that the people who last the longest are the people who are the most agreeable to say, well, I appreciate your opinion, cool, and leave it at that. Like, some of the most hardcore critics out here that have been doing this for 40 years, 50 years, that still go to the theaters to go do these press screenings out here, and they'll regale like all these times, like, "Oh yeah, Sandy, you remember that one time they sent a helicopter for us to go to San Francisco for a press junket?" She goes, "Oh yeah, we went and they had a full buffet." Like, they talk about things like that, and they're some of the people that are like, they're quick to give their thoughts, but they're also quick to follow up with, "Well, what did you think? How did you feel?" And because, not because it's
Dialogue.
a nicety, yeah, but it's out of earnest curiosity. They want to know, and that's one of the best things. I was going to say one other moment that I remember, that not so much on the like awkward scale of, oh, kids in an R-rated film, but I remember I got a special invite to go see Martin Scorsese's Silence.
Mm.
Um, but it was a during the day screening, because it's like 3 hours long.
Mm-hmm.
Which I say that now, and I'm like, well, most movies nowadays are 3 hours long, but back then it was long, and so it was like at noon. So I'm like, all right, cool. I got out of work, headed down there, and there was only maybe 10 of us out of the entire theater. It was not open to the public. It was just going to be a press only screening. And I sat there with some of these great people that are still working in this community here in this city today. And we sat there and we saw this film. And if you've ever seen Silence, it's Martin Scorsese's effort into explaining how he views religion ultimately. But even in that mindset, like, it was just a beautiful film. And at the end of the movie, everybody literally just sat there for like another 10 minutes, and kind of sat in a little bit of silence, kind of like trying to gather what they saw. But it was one of the first times I had ever sat in a theater and really had a film perplex some of the most brightest minds that I knew in this community, and kind of wait and sit to see what they're going to do next. Like, where are they going to go with this? And one of the critics out here, his name is Matthias. He stood up and said, "Well, that was a banger," and was just like, "I'm like, that's all you got?" He goes, "I don't know. I gotta write this thing up later." He goes, "But that's all I got for now." And I'm like, "Hey, I'll take it." He goes, "But he got up, and he's an older gentleman, but that was his thing, is that was a banger." And I'm like, I wish I could put that in my review. Like, I really do. But it was just one. It was one of those like solemn moments where, how they say death and taxes are the great equalizer of the world. This was one of those situations where it was like this movie put everybody on the same level, and it was interesting to see like the humbling kind of demeanor of some of the people who just didn't know how to put it into words at the time, and then one of the most seasoned ones get up and say something so random as to say this was a banger. And I'm like, so that was probably one of my best, because I got a ton of these,
Yeah.
like if I go through all of them, but like I remember that one standing out to be one of the most iconic moments in my career as a critic you know
So the funny thing is, like, I think we've never actually ever addressed in our entire history of like knowing each other and being friends is that you're a critic. And I don't know. I guess for me, I've always been like, I've been an audience member, and then I just started making stuff, and then James Cameron's like, call yourself a director, and I'm like, I'm a director. But I've always felt like there was this weird line between audiences and critics. Like there's this like absolute wall that like these people are X and these people are Y, where like there is no like fluidity between the two. There is no, there has to be a differentiation. There couldn't be a blend. And it's really cool to hear your, experiences from the lens and experience that's like, I'm a critic, I'm part of this, a critic, this critics, association, this community. And your guys' experience watching films. I realize asking you like what's your favorite movie going experience and like memorable, it's like, man, you have plenty. I actually wanted to bring up so far, the time we're recording this, we're in September. Strike is still going strong. Certain independent studios have signed the interim agreement, but in terms of watching movies, without naming any of them, so far to this year, I've watched, and these aren't only movies that come out this year. I've watched like other movies I haven't got a chance to watch. Like things that came in 2022. I've watched over 100 movies, and that is between going to a theater, watching it on an app, watching it at a friend's house, watching it as like the anniversary events, watching it in a field in LA, because in LA there's plenty of places if you love movies you can go watch it. For your experience, does watching movies, because I've always had this idea that like I'm watching all these movies, and I think to myself, like, I used to have such a critics they just watch movies. Like, I don't even know if they even want to watch movies. It's their job now. And like for me now, I'm just like, I'm surprised I still like movies. I'm surprised I still like films, because like, my God, like you are, batting 1,000, and it is like that, 300 strike. It's like, maybe those would be good, but there is a chance that they could potentially be, more good, and then far and few in between. But from you, like watching as many films as you had, the quantity and the sheer volume of it, has there ever been a sense of feeling like, man, I really don't know if I'm going to want to watch this movie, but I know I have to? Or like, do you still try to hold on to that, like, let me give them this honest shot, and hopefully maybe I am surprised?
The thing is, and it's funny because it's like I always I always reference back to something from a kids movie with Ratatouille and Anton Ego, and it's like I go back to the whole mindset of like, I don't like movies, I love them. Like it's something where, much like any other profession that requires a passion, I am passionate about watching movies. I am passionate about learning about movies. I'm passionate about learning about the people who make them. And it's an ever flowing, like if we look at just the nature of storytelling historically. Storytelling has been the one thing that has been able to communicate every single aspect of humanity throughout the course of humanity. You
History,
know,
culture, society,
hmm
yeah, lessons, morals, religion.
exactly, exactly. And it hasn't stopped as long as imagination and the push to put that imagination down into some form of medium will cease. That it will always continue. And movies have been that visual storytelling that people have honestly not known that they've needed for all these thousands of years, but when it came, they needed it every day. And it has been the way that many people of all walks of life have been able to create their story or to put their thoughts into a form that people can receive. And I have to, and that goes to back to myself. Like I have to have a sense of appreciation for everything that they're doing, everything that they're putting out, everything that they are trying to do. Because, as you know, Tom, it takes work and it takes revisions and it takes going back to square one and then it takes walking another 100 steps and then going back to square one again. And it takes time and it takes effort. I used to have people ask me about because I'm a bigger guy. I used to play football in high school and played in college, and people ask me, well, who's your favorite NFL team? And I'll tell them, I said, honestly, I'm not a big fan of NFL. I actually like college football. And they're like, well, what's the difference? That's where they end up going anyway. And I'm like, well, NFL player will go sit on the bench for, 2, 3 hours out of a given Sunday, and they'll get paid, a couple $1 million for doing that. You take a college student who is literally going through all his classes all week long, goes to all their practices, probably has to work a part-time job afterwards, goes home, does all of his own washing and cleaning and everything else, and then goes, has test exams, homework, and then has to get on a bus or get on an airplane, go wherever to anywhere on Saturday, play a game, come back Sunday, get everything ready to do that whole week all over again. And they are performing for our entertainment and for their passion. And I appreciate that. And that goes back to with films, I appreciate the time and effort that people put into these things because honestly, growing up, this was a way that I found, storytelling to be the most, effective for me, and I loved it, and it was something that was passed down from my parents. My parents are big movie fans, and they love watching movies. They're randomly out of nowhere like, hey, why don't we watch this Stephen King movie, or why don't we watch this, Stanley Kubrick movie? Why don't we watch this? And they have a whole plethora of choices on their own shelf, both VHS, DVD, and Blu-ray. But it's one of those things where I have to consider all parts, not just the single parts, not just okay, well this movie has this actor that I'm not a fan of. No, it has this actor, but it also has this director, has this sound designer, has this cinematographer, it has all these aspects of like the foley work, all the people who do the CG. CG is a really big conversation in the industry right now. With certain parts of them being unionized and possibly maybe going to strike as well. Uh, there's so many different aspects that require to be recognized. And even so, like with the strikes, as we mentioned, the writers are some of those people who don't get the love they deserve. And that is where my mindset is at all the time. I want to make sure that I give the love to those people. I want to make sure that the people who are outstanding in their field are recognized, even if they do a small movie. We saw a movie not too long ago called The Blackening, and it was a fun satirical film. I loved it, but someone on the film that worked on the film was the costume designer who designed the masks for that film, and I happened to be friends with her on Instagram, and I would see things pop up here and there, and I actually reached out after I saw the film. I said, "Hey, your work was amazing. Just want you to know we're gonna be mentioning you." And she sent this long old message like, "Oh my God, I didn't think anybody was gonna notice. I was working really hard. I was trying to do this and that, and blah blah blah. And I really appreciate your kind words and so forth." And I'm like, see, it's people like that who probably aren't used to getting recognized, who probably have to push to get recognized on their own terms. Um, and the fact that I did the work, I did the research, I did the time, and I watched the film, and I enjoyed it, and I recognized their work in the film, and made sure to let them know, hey, your work was seen, I appreciated it, and I'm gonna try to make an effort to let other people know that you did a great job. And It's not an effort of like, oh, shine my own, thing and toot my own horn. It's they deserve to be recognized. Everybody deserves to be recognized if they're putting the effort into those films. If they're putting in all those hours, if they're dialing all these rendering hours, doing all this work, all these different revisions, these script revisions, these all the people who are doing the work on the back end that don't really get noticed. Like, I want to be that one to say, hey, you did great, and you deserve more recognition. And if I can do that on my platform, I will do that.
That's awesome. I constantly kind of talk about, it's the whole thing. It's like you were hearing, but you weren't listening, right? And it's like you were watching, you were viewing, and I always try to always like encourage or advocate for engaging with the film. And that's like work, like, and I think that what you're talking about, if you don't love it, it feels like work. If you don't love watching a film and seeing this collaborative piece between so many craftspeople and journey people who have so many life experiences and how it all brought them together under one roof for X amount of hours, for X amount of days, for X amount of weeks, then it all is going to seem like work to try to engage with the film and see like, like, oh, I like the colors of this. Is like, okay, but do you see how it like works on the costuming? Or like, do you see that like that blue is different than the blue you'd see in this film, or the way that they use orange is very different than that one, and the way they use this sound is different from that film, or like how they reference that film, like you realize like it comes from this thing, so you have to imagine that everyone there had this history and this love for a thing. And it's not, sometimes there are cheap references, but sometimes there are great homages or homages, if you pronounce it that way. No, I really like that, because I do agree that like, I just don't want, the movie going experience to become this disposable art form where, everyone's looking for a product. Everyone's looking for a team to root for, like kind of like NFL, where it's like, I don't care about the players. I care about the franchise. And it's like, well, you care about buying a shirt then, you care about like the clout you can have about, cool, I got this colored jersey during this time, but that's all you care about, versus someone else who has the exact same one, who's like, no, this is the time that this player came in and they're coming from here. And obviously I don't know anything about sports, so I'm out of my depth here. But like watching
hey, it sounded good. That's all that matters. It sounded good.
But so, like, watching a film and like really trying to see the intention behind it. And I think I always like to imagine no one goes out to go make a bad movie. There are times that you could definitely feel like some people phone it in because this might be another paycheck. We are, for those who are listening and may not know, there was a time, and I don't know if it's still going on, but there was a time where if you wanted to make your movie, like Tom has this movie, it's like, cool, we'll take your script, we'll produce it for you, like a studio will buy it. And it's like, but you got to direct these 2 other movies too. And these are not yours, and you may not like them, but we don't care. But we want to have you contract for X amount of time. So it's, the phrase is, one for you, one for me. And, Kevin Smith has had that experience before. In order for him to make Red State, he had to do Cop Out, so it's like, that has existed. I don't know how much it existed anymore, especially with how deals work and everything like that at this moment. But like when you do get those moments that you experience where you do get to see the artists and their work come through it, and when you have that level of respect, the reward comes beyond doing that quote unquote work of being like, who is that? Who did that? Like, that's really cool. And then that there's a person, and then what they've worked on. And I think, for our respective shows, we do a good level of due diligence to look up like, oh, this writer came from this producer came from that. The people who worked on, like Rick Baker, who became famous and well known for this, is working on this movie. Like, they apprenticed or they trained this person who worked on The Thing. And then, like, it's really cool. It makes it rich. It makes it feel like, oh, like, Junkie XL and Hans Zimmer, they share a bay. And you're like, oh, so like they're crossing streams all the time. So like you feel like there's not just teams of people working against each other in this war of consumerism. There's a whole web and community and society and like population of artists who would just love to work with each other more and more to make something that people can, have posters on in their walls. But Yeah.
Yeah, and it's the random little things that add a little bit more flavor to the full experience of a film. Like, take for instance the Invisible Man, the Bloomhouse film that came out not too long ago. A lot of people saw it, and they were divided on it. But if you take a look at some of the behind the scenes work, the Foley work on that movie was phenomenal. Like, all of the Foley work that was done to make sure every single thing in that movie seemed to keep you on edge. They worked very meticulously to make sounds that are a lot sharper and a lot more high toned, rather than to give them a lot of bass, so that the undertone of the scene would be what you're experiencing. And it takes thought process, and it takes like planning and scheming, and it's like you wouldn't think of that after just watching a movie, like, oh my god, that was whatever. But you put that into perspective, and like, oh my god, they were intending to make me feel like my heart was going to pound out of my chest in this scene. Then it adds another layer of appreciation. And then you have, the thought of like, oh well, what else? And that's the kind of catalyst, if you will, for curiosity, within the world of movies.
Absolutely, I absolutely agree with that, and I think like that's the thing. Like that's like the bug that like once you start falling in love with movies, then you start going into that, and then those are the things that like will keep you intrigued, and it could be one section or a whole other sector. But I do want to segue into a potentially a can of worms, but I don't want to take up all the time to do it, but we have your experience, we have my experience of watching films, engaging with it. How do you think the rest of the world is kind of experiencing or going through it or going through the motions of it? Like, we see like all the streamers pop up. We've seen the Marvel versus DC. We've seen the IP war between, we've even seen, if we want to go like the original, like to me, my first ever like this versus that is the Schwarzenegger Stallone. And then you had the not even necessarily like Pacino versus De Niro stuff, because you had Godfather, but then like you had Heat, which was like one of the first times they actually got to be across from each other in the same scene. But like now, where are we? Like we have apps, we have influencers, we have the internet, we have so much pirating. You have James Cameron, who's like, I really want to do 3D films so that no one could pirate these movies. And that didn't take off the well. We have the volume coming around. We have like, series getting straight to orders. We have shorter mini series. We have shorter series in general. How do you feel how the general zeitgeist is feeling about the viewing
Yeah.
experience?
I mean, you could look back at the 80s, and you look at the timing that it took for certain franchises to bring out their sequels, even with like Back to the Future, even if they filmed them, consecutively within enough time to where the release time could have been a lot shorter. But like things like Star Wars, that took a few years for each sequel to come out. You look at Indiana Jones, which took a few years for each sequel to come out. Back to the Future, and as time moved on, that spacing didn't really change up until we got to a point to where we started creating fandoms. And I think a lot of our viewing experiences now are based in fandoms, which is fine. Everybody, has the right to be crazy out, fanatical for whatever property they want. That's the nature of just free will. But we started getting to the point to where technology started catching up with the nature of our demands, and the slight under grumblings of like, oh, I wish that would come out sooner. And then they're like, technology's like, hey, I could help with that, and started creating more opportunities for things to, come out quicker, CG to be done faster, things like that. I think we're in an era of consumerism that really is outpacing what we're capable of putting out, and we're coming to a head, because if any sign of that is indicative of it, it's right now with the strikes, right now with the CG conversations, the CG effects artists, that are having conversations right now. It's the nature of, we are wanting more and more and more, without recognizing that we're sacrificing on solid storytelling and proper world building. Um, but I think the nature is that, even though we are continually pushing for more and more, there are still people who, within the last 5 years, 5, 10 years have been really pushing that mindset of needing to have, you know, solid creative original ideas put out there, even if they are low budget, even if they are maybe of a genre that not many people like maybe they're in horror, maybe they're in romance, but they are creating original stories. And I think a lot of people are starting to become more aware of that. Yes, you're always going to have the people who are saying, oh, superhero movies are taking over theaters and they're too much of like, franchise continuations, like with Disney and their Wreck-It Ralph Part 13, Part 14. But the fact of the matter is that as long as there's always going to be an audience, there will never be a lack of demand or a lack of supply. So, that supply and demand mindset. But I do think there are creators and directors out there who are starting to see that, maybe a change of pace isn't a bad idea. And to go to the whole idea of like the theater viewing experience, there's nothing out there that can replace the true feeling, as you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, of going in, grabbing your big bucket of popcorn with extra butter, grabbing your tall Sprite, for me, it's like I go in every time I go to the movies, I get the same thing. I get a small pizza, I get a large Sprite with no ice, I grab a handful of napkins, of course, and I grab a thing of red vines, and that's my go-to every time I walk in there, and that experience will never change, whether or not if I'm going to a midnight showing or I'm going to a early matinee 10 o'clock showing, 10 a.m. showing. Like, that's my routine, that's my joy, that's part of my love for movies itself. And the great thing is, I'm not the only one. I know I'm not the only one. You and I having this conversation is evidence enough that I know I'm not the only one. And the fact that you and I have this platform, and there are several others out there who don't have a platform like this, I'm sure that they feel the same way. And as many people are continuing to foster that mindset and create examples for other people, even young people, I love, one of my biggest things is I love going to movies that are akin to my childhood, such as the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie that just recently came out. I love going to movies like that, and I love seeing, now that I've gotten a little softer, I've gotten a little bit more, I love seeing dads come in with their sons, their daughters, and they're looking, and their daughters are in this, or their kids are in this, like, Ninja Turtle outfit. They got the mask on, they're ready, and they're watching, and they're laughing, and they're pointing, and the dad's like, "Yeah, that's us," and this, and I'm like, I'm watching the movie, but I'm enjoying that because this man is fostering the exact thing that we want to continue to perpetuate, and that is coming to the theater is an event, it's an experience, it's a act of love, because we're coming in and spending the time to not only show love to the people who are creating these movies, to the people who are, voicing these characters, acting in these roles, doing the sound, everything that I mentioned earlier, but we're also showing love to foster that love and appreciation to the young people, to say, hey, this is great, this is what we can, this is something that is accessible. And as somebody who grew up, not, I put it plainly, I grew up poor. I grew up in the hood. I grew up, with minimal opportunities of like great vacations or whatever it may be. But every time my parents, they splurged to buy, like big speakers for the TV. They bought a good looking TV. They bought a great VHS player or a DVD player or a Blu-ray player. And on the weekends, we would, hit the AC, because we were in Texas. It's always hot. We'd hit the AC, we'd turn down the lights, and we'd put on a movie and blast it. And we would watch Twister. We would watch, what do you call it? Laurel and Hardy movies. We would watch The Three Stooges. We would watch, Abbott and Costello all the time. Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin. All the Universal monster movies. All the movies from the '70s. I learned about, Fulci and, things like all these Italian horror films from my parents. I learned about the wonders of Stephen King from my folks, all in that little living room. And it fostered a love in me that just couldn't be quantified with just, yeah, I'll just go see a movie. No, I needed to go and talk about movies. I needed to have a platform. I needed to be able to share this with people, because of the fact that I can't sit by and let these people who have helped shape my future, my young self, I can't let them be unsung. I can't let their praises be unsung. I have to continue. And I know there are people out there who are doing the same because I see it in theaters like that. I see it when I leave the theaters and there's kids that are getting excited because they just came out of seeing, the latest, whatever that Transylvania or whatever movie is, or like coming out and seeing these great films. I've literally rolled my eyes at least twice every time I go to the theaters and I see that new Paw Patrol trailer. But then I realize this is creating another lower layer of reaming in the children and letting them see what cinema is and how it affects their lives and how much it can be a point of passion for them. So I my hope for the future is that the people like us continue to foster that and continue to be great examples for that, because of the fact that, you know, the fact of the matter is our time's limited on this earth. All I can do is leave a bunch of words, leave a bunch of impressions, and hope to God that when I am gone, that people will know what I was passionate about, who I loved, and where I showed that love to. And I want them to know that if there was one thing that people knew about me, that I love my family and I loved movies. And there's no doubt in my mind that I am making efforts to it, but I know that people out there share that same passion and love, and I want them to be able to, continue to do so and know that they're supported, because, we're movie freaks. That's what we do.
God, I should have had that be the end of the show. Because I'm just, the funny thing is, like, I'm a horrible human being in comparison, only because I say it this way of, because I was like, what did you, and you're like, oh, my hopes and my dreams. I was like, I have no hope and dream anymore. I'm so, like, the funny thing that, you talk about, there's people who like movies and there's people who love movies. And I remember in school, one of the most, like, profound things I ever learned was, like, if you want to make movies, you have to learn how to love them, then hate them, and then if you can come back and love it again, then you will truly learn how to make it, because then you'll love it inside and out for all its bullshit and all of its problems, and like how it's stuck in between commerce and art and technology and art, and the constant struggle and turmoil it goes through, and your depiction of your experiences is just absolutely, I think, what people should be striving for, and it's definitely not something that I do. Have you, there's been a few things lately this year I've watched where I'm like, I should be more like that, and today is one of those days where I'm like, I should be more like Eddie. Like, God bless. I'm so, like, we need to start demanding better things, and like, it's okay to want more from, but it's okay to also respect where it comes from. I always feel like, I'm in this place where, like, everyone will say I'm a jerk, or I'm rude, or I'm like pretentious because I want, my stories to have a little bit more higher brow, or to say something or be about something. And someone challenged me and was like, what do you think Jurassic Park's all about? Then I was like, it's about building a family. It's about this character having to, like, learn how to be with kids, and this character to learn what it's like to, like, have to deal with life and death. And you have these characters there. And then they looked at me like I was an idiot. Like, I just explained to them how aliens fertilize a planet. Like, that's how they looked at me. And they're like, it's about dinosaurs. I'm like, you know what? Hey. And I was thinking, I was like, the Eddie thing. Yeah. I was like, whatever, you do you, boo boo. You do you,
exactly. And it's.
But I want to die when I hear that. I'm just like, but you know what? I counter and I say, well, Jurassic World's about even more dinosaurs. Mm-hmm. Why is it not as quote unquote memorable? Why are we thinking about the first one more than we think about the second or third or fourth or fifth or sixth one? It's like, what's Star Wars 1 about? Why we talk about Star Wars 1, and a lot of people can say, like, well, because it's the first one and we never see anything like it. It's like, yeah, but now 30, 40 years later, can't we make them better, or have we regressed, or can we not crack that same stone and make a beautiful marble, sculpture out of it? But yeah. God, I feel like, we could definitely go on for more, but we are going to get long in the tooth, and I don't want us to lose that positivity, that shine, and that hope that you had just before I opened my fat mouth.
and that's the thing, is that when it comes to things like that, honestly, Tom, if you are pushing to put out a good product, that is always a plus, no matter how much time it takes. And I feel like that's the nature of the industry. That's the nature of the business. That's the nature of thought. You know, we want to be the best because we want people to see the best. You know, it's the people who are too much into their heads. They're like, oh, I want to be the best just so I can be the best. No, that's short-sighted. It's I want to be the best because I want to provide the best. And I don't feel like you're that type of person who's like, I want to be the best just to be the best. You have a much broader scope of things, and you have a much broader view of where you're going, and you know the nature of just journeys and whatnot. I feel like that's not the type of person you are. You're the type of person who I want to push because I want people to have the best of me. And that's the nature of how this industry is divided. There's people who just choose to be, you know, oh, I'm just the best because I'm the best. And then there's people who are like, no, I push, I pry, I try to do things to a level degree because when people see my movies, they are moved. I one of the directors that I feel like does that the most is Denis Villeneuve. I remember going to the press screening for Arrival, and I had no idea what I was in for. And I was in a movie theater of all these different critics, mind you. I had never seen anybody cry in a movie. I had never, you know, whatever. But the end of Arrival, I turned to my left. Every single critic is in tears. I turned to my right. Every single critic is in tears, and the entire press section is wiping their eyes, as am I, mind you, because never has a movie at that point in time created such thought and introspect in a film. And when I left the theater, yeah, there were people who had their own interpretation of what it meant and what he was trying to say, but ultimately the man gave his best. He put his heart out there for a sci-fi film, for a movie about aliens coming to Earth. If you want to get to brass tacks, the whole Jurassic Park is about dinosaurs. Yeah, it's a movie about aliens coming to Earth. On a deeper level, there are so
It's
much
not
more
about
different
choice and love.
exactly, exactly. And I even talked to I had an interview with the author
Of
of
the
the
short
original
story?
short story. Yeah, and we talked, and I said, did you have any idea how much of an impact your story would have? He goes, honestly, the movie and my story are different. He goes, because I'm a mathematician and my thought process was in logic. And I created the bones of that movie, the basic story element, but what Denis Villeneuve did was create magic out of my story. He goes, I offered him he goes, I offered him a body, he gave it life. And it's like to look at somebody and to say, this man not only breathed new life into something that I thought already had legs on its own, but he also made it magical. Like that's the type of director that we need to protect. That's the type of director that we need to look towards to see what else is he going to do. I mean, we've seen him do amazing things since then, and he hasn't failed me yet. So like there are people like that, and that's kind of in the nature of thought process and people in you know uh, aspirers, if you want to say, you know, striving for that best thing. You know, I think that's where I put you in, Tom. Like that's the nature of like the people who want to provide the best because you know it's what people deserve. So
Thank you. I'm gonna go cry after this. I think it definitely, if we're to do a second version of this, and again, we can just kind of continue to go up and down the map of our movie views and experiences. I think there definitely is one where if you talk about things like Arrival, where it's like things that constantly push, and we talked about it before we even recorded. But talking about Tenet, and I would definitely want to talk about that because I feel like that was something that definitely pushed for good, for better, and for worse. But with that, I'm gonna go and wrap it up. Eddie, thank you so much for being part of the Nerd On podcast. And being part of the Nerd On family, and you know, collaborating with us as long as you have. Also, just being such a great friend, and also an amazing human being. I want everyone who's listening right now to go check out the Filmlosophers or everywhere else that Eddie will go ahead and promote after I'm done spieling. But you know, follow and like, be like Eddie. Look at the world with a little bit of hope. And look into yourself, and like, you know, I love those three things, you know, who I loved, where I gave that love to, and what I believe. What are the things?
What I did with that love.
Yes. Give me all three one more time.
It says, who I loved, how I love them, and what I did with that love.
That's it. That's so good. That's so good. If that doesn't make you feel better, everyone, then I don't know what will. But Eddie, give me a shout out. Give me all the things where people can follow you, where they can check out, things you want them to be caring about.
Yeah, absolutely. You can check us out at our website, filmlosophers.com. We have all of our episodes there, as well as on socials at Facebook at facebook.com/filmlosophers, and on Twitter and Instagram at Filmlosophy101, as well as on Threads. We're also on Blue Sky at the Filmlosophers podcast. We are also on any app that streams podcasts, such as iTunes, Google Play, Libsyn, Player FM, Audio Boom, Spotify, TuneIn, or iHeart. You can find us there at the Filmlosophers. And so we're actually doing Star Trek month this month. So we did our first episode this week on Star Trek Nemesis, which is a very interesting conversation. So you have
Tom
to check
Hardy,
it out.
baby.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you again, everyone listening in. I hope you enjoyed yourself. I hope you learned something. I hope it got you to look into your lives and then also recontextualize. Maybe how do you love watching movies? Or maybe you could love movies a little bit more. Or maybe you've been loving it too much and you're an angry man like me. But we'd love to hear what you have to say. Reach out to us on all the social media. Take care of yourselves. Right now it's hot, it's warm, wherever you're at. Regardless, you should be hydrating, telling people you love them, taking care of yourself, and taking care of them. And you all know the drill. As always, nerd on.
Ending broadcast.